And of course, watchmaking in those days was an element which we needed to have. Today, watchmaking is more the artistic part of that. It's art.
Welcome back to the Collectability Podcast. This is part 2 of our conversation with Dr. Peter Fries. If you haven't listened to part 1, please go back and have a listen. It's not to be missed. But let's get back to our cliffhanger. Peter, what is the future of the Patek Philippe Museum?
In one word, history. History is the element all the success of this company is based on. And it's even more clear when we go back a little bit in history and see how watchmaking has evolved over the years and when watches were really important. Because before we had the quartz watch, mechanical watches had to be built in a special way to be so precise that they were good enough for people to be used to manage their days. And of course, watchmaking in those days was an element which we needed to have. Today, watchmaking is more the artistic part of that. It's art. The museum does show both worlds very well because the big cutting line is the 1970s when the quartz watch changed the Swiss watch industry. And it was the Stern families and Philip Stern's vision to make Patek Philippe what it is today. The most important, most prominent, and the company with the best watches in the world. So for the company itself, the museum is part of their DNA by now. After these 20 years, we can feel this. Everybody who works at Patek Philippe is asked, is basically carried to the museum and has to see it. It's part of their working environment. And it's getting more and more, and Mr. Thierry Stern is very promoting that. It becomes more and more the part of everyday's process, whether it's in marketing, whether it's in development of new watches. It's all these little details which makes the museum to be a place nobody can eliminate anymore. And this, I don't think anybody wanted to do this ever, but we had also to demonstrate, like every museum has to demonstrate, that it's needed. And I think this museum is needed more than anything else in the history of the company and also in the future of this company.
I recently noticed when visiting the website, Patek.com, one of the first things you see is the museum, front and center. Is this a recent, maybe I didn't notice it before, is this a recent new development?
That's a completely new development, and Mr. Thierry Stern has pushed that to make the museum the central part of the completely strategy, how to communicate the company, its efforts. It's maybe not very clear how important the historical watches have been. These watches which been built by Jean-André Philippe and his successors, and the quality these movements have, there's almost no way today to build this kind of quality we see there. So they become historical items, like an archive where you can study the history of not just the watches themselves, but also about the technologies, how they were made. So these old pieces, 100, 150 years, they really speak to us. We can learn from them. The only thing we have to do is we have to educate our eyes and our brain to understand them better. And having a collection of that size, it's a critical mass, allows us to answer many, many questions in the future. And I think Mr. Thierry Stern, the family, of course, Mr. Philippe Stern, they fully understand that. And they have now positioned the museum as the core of their activities.
The long-term vision of the Stern family, and I think a lot of people don't know that Henry Stern, so going back 3 generations, he had an incredible museum collection, essentially in a drawer that they would take out for exhibitions, notably in the U.S., starting in 1949 and throughout the decades at various retailers. But as you mentioned earlier, World's Fairs, going back much earlier, generations earlier, historical pieces from the brand were taken out and shown. And I find this really intriguing that this tradition continues today with the museum and no doubt will continue in the future. Can you speak to that as how these historical pieces help support modern Patek Philippe watches?
You know, in 1893, in the Chicago World Fair, the company was in the jury, so they were not allowed to present watches themselves. But then they made an exhibition on historic timepieces. So what we're doing today is not so far away from what we did more than 100 years ago. I think being connected to history, leading us into the future, has always been the DNA of the company. And now having their own museum, the world's largest museum on timepieces, is just the capstone on that development.
History does have a way of repeating itself, and it's fun to think even outside of the world of watches, how technology and art connect and overlap in so many different ways. And it reminds me of a story you shared earlier about Steve Jobs and how you shared with him the world of horology in person. Can you tell us that story?
Yeah, that's a long time ago. I was working in a museum in Munich, and in the storage there were watches without cases, just movements. And my job was to look at them and find out, do they need cleaning, or describing them. So I took some of them apart, and the discovery, I was very young, the discovery was many of these watches look alike, but they're signed by different watchmakers. So how can that come? So these were embossed. They were sold as raw movements to Paris, to London, and finalized and then signed by the local watchmakers there. And that's how they became parts of very beautiful watches in nice cases. And so my job, which I was lucky enough to define myself, was to find out how can I kind of describe these pieces and put them in categories. And it was the early times where we were able to buy computers. So I had a little computer and wrote a software myself and compared these watches, made a book of that. And then I wanted to go further on, but the computer was not strong enough I had. So I called Apple in Munich. They had an office there. And I explained them what I want to do. And they said, no problem. We'll come tomorrow. Steve is in town.
Wow.
And we'll bring you a computer. So I was running up to my director general, because I was working in the basement as a craftsman, and saying, surprise, surprise, tomorrow Steve Jobs will be here. Are you ready? And he said, what? Why is he coming? But he was surprised, but he was very happy on this visit. So Steve came. He gave us 2 computers, one for the director general, one for my workshop. I had what I wanted. And then he finally asked, what do you need that for? And I said, yeah, I'm a watchmaker, and I make an analysis, and I write my own computer programs. And this computer, a Mac Plus, was at this time
cutting edge.
Cutting edge. And to have that, I couldn't wait to get it unpacked. And then he said, can you show me what you're doing? Of course. So we went to my workshop. And I had a microscope, and I had a big screen at those days in the 1980s. And I started to take a watch apart, and he followed on the screen, and he said, can I try? So I gave him tweezers and guided his hands, and he did very well. And I don't know, maybe the Apple Watch was born in those days, I don't know. But I think it was an experience which got really down to his heart. And for me, it's unforgettable. Being with a legend like this in my workshop and taking a watch with him apart, that was great.
And of course it's impossible, but it's fun to imagine if Steve Jobs went to the Patek Philippe Museum today, what do you think his takeaway of the museum would be?
You know, I discovered him as an inventor. So he's a businessman, but he is also very interested in innovation. One day I had a dinner with the founders of Miele, the washing machine company. And Mr. Rudolf Miele told me, all of a sudden, because maybe I mentioned my story on Steve Jobs, I said, one day I got a call from him. And he said, I bought a washing machine and I took it apart. And I learned how to build a computer without a fan.
Wow.
So I think that's how inventors work. And normally you don't know these stories, but in this case, we have it, and it's for an historian a nice, interesting detail to see how innovation happens. It happens in very peculiar ways.
And nothing happens in a vacuum. This is something.
Nothing happens in a vacuum.
Fact.
No.
It's funny. I don't go anywhere without two things: a Patek Philippe and an iPhone. And I think a lot of us can relate to that to this day.
And now everybody goes through the museum and takes photos with their iPhones, you know?
Yes. Okay. Hot question. Are pictures allowed to be taken at the Patek Philippe Museum?
Yeah, that's very recently. So the company decided that the demand is so high on photography, and it's very difficult now to say no. We always said for security reasons we don't want that. But in this modern world, everybody has an iPhone. Everybody photographs. Our guards getting tired of reminding people it's not allowed. People don't understand that, so we changed the policy. Now people can do selfies. They can take photos of the watches, and whatever they do with it is in their hands.
I'm so glad to hear about this change because, as you probably know, on social media, it was almost a status symbol if you were able to take pictures at the Patek Philippe Museum, because if the guards see you, you're in big trouble. And this was a year ago and earlier.
Yeah.
So now it's a bit democratic. People can take their photographs, and every time someone visits the museum, I love seeing it on social media.
Yeah, I see.
Hashtag Patek Museum.
I see so happy people there when they are in front of this watch and that watch, and
a selfie with a Graves watch.
Exactly.
It's good fun, but it's a way that reaches a new audience and connects. And I love to see what people are sharing of what excites them when they visit the museum. So
museums are not static; they develop, and of course they're part of what we do today. And an iPhone is now almost part of our body.
What do people say to you after they visit the museum? Do you get firsthand feedback?
Yes, we have books and people write in there, and they're interesting comments. Some of these comments are very helpful to make the museum better. I stay in touch with our tour guides. Of course, I work with my assistant curators, and I talk to visitors. I do many tours myself because I think it's important to have the finger on the nerve,
of course,
the ear where it should be. In the showroom, we have this big opportunity that we're not looking into a book, we're looking into the real objects. We're having access to the objects, and the museum is all about the object. And so I want to know from everyone who visits the museum what he likes and what he doesn't like. And of course, there's details, but in general, they are overwhelmed by the amount of timepieces, by the quality of the timepieces, by the way things are displayed, and by the value they express by just looking at them.
What's the biggest complaint that people have?
Walking so many stairs.
The stairs.
Yeah.
Yes.
And, now attendance is growing. When I started, we had 25,000. Pretty soon, we face 100,000 visitors. This year, I think we're in the 80,000s. It's growing every year. It makes it difficult to access sometimes. So we need to work on our entrance. We need to change procedures. So we have architects and teams working on that to come up with solutions, how we can make this a more pleasant visit at the beginning, because if you have to wait outside for 2 hours to come in, which in July and August is very often the case, in the heat, so I go there and bring water outside and stuff like this, but it's not really that's what it should be. So there's need of improvement.
A 2-hour wait to get into the museum. I'm happy to hear that, but also sad to hear that all in one. Are there museum pieces that are not on view?
We are not acquiring for the safes. We don't have a real storage area. We do have a nice collection on tools. We do have no collection of antique watches in the safe. Every antique piece is on display. Of course, for Patek Philippe, it's a little bit different. We have a significant collection in the safe, but that's for study purposes. It's grown over the years. We do exhibitions worldwide as a company, not the museum. Or sometimes the museum is involved in that. So these are pieces which can easily travel for those exhibitions. That's why we have them.
In the watch world, your methods as Patek Philippe of acquiring pieces is kept in secret. I mean, I've asked you, like, what's your acquisition process? And no surprise, you don't overshare. But can you share some tidbits of like what you're looking for? How do you find new acquisitions? And what are the secrets to building the Patek Philippe collection? First
of all, you need to have an overview of what's going on in the market. So pretty much time of my day is studying online or traditional auction catalogs, a couple hundred a year. And so I see what the market offers. Then auction houses call me and say, Peter, there's something interesting. So they know what we have, and then they come and say, oh, maybe that's interesting for you. So that starts a process sometimes. Then, of course, I know the collection by now so much by heart that I know where the gaps are and where the missing pieces are. Then I tell the story, and auction houses are looking for these pieces. And sometimes they call me and say, I have it. And I've had a great story. We bought this perpetual calendar from Thomas Much, and I said, to everybody I said, I want to have that piece. I know it does exist. Find it for me. And I must have said it so often and to so many people that everybody was believing we have it already. So in the auction, nobody recognized it's on sale. And I got it almost for nothing, you know.
You were the sniper in the auction
house.
And
then I got a phone call from a very important web platform, and they said, Peter, we don't know what happened, but we missed this watch, you know. And I was very proud, because if it would have been popped up there, it would have been 10 times more expensive. So this whole acquiring process is taking and giving. It's a very sensitive way of doing it, that you do not pay always the highest price, but with a little kind of smartness, you can do a lot.
Do you like to bid and buy at auction?
I've not done it before I entered the Patek Philippe Museum. I must say it's thrilling when you're in the room and you're the winner. That's kind of pushes your adrenaline to a level you normally don't have. It's a lot of joy, but it's not what drives me for my work. You know, it's nice to be seen. It's nice to make the contacts with people, and when they see Peter's coming, okay, he's going to buy because he really wants that piece. We have that privilege that it very often goes that way, but it's not really super important for me, to be honest. It's fun, but the real part of my job is describing the pieces, making catalogs or internet access, or all kind of research work. That's where my heart beats.
Have you noticed? I have one more auction question. Over the last 12 years of attending auctions, how have things changed in the last decade? In the auction room, in particular.
My ideal auction, and I'm not an auctioneer, would be a catalog without pictures that would force people to come and to look at the pieces. And whenever I acquire a piece, I go to the auction and I look at it very carefully. Sometimes I'm allowed to take it apart. People know I'm a watchmaker, so they trust me, and so I'm very happy that I can do that. And very often when I see the watch in person, I decide I will not suggest to acquire it for the museum. So you can in general not buy from the catalog. Photoshop does horrible work in that sense because it eliminates scratches and makes things looking better than they are. And light can do a lot as well. So if you want to acquire, you have to go to the auction before it's sold and look at it very carefully. And sitting in the auction room, having so many online bids and so many phone calls, it's kind of de-illusionizes this whole room. And so sometimes I would like it's like in the old days. But I'm sure it will never come. There may be something new movements.
Today,
so.
I sometimes feel like you're walking into a casino. Yes. There's music, there's lights. It's like sensory overload.
Yeah.
But it is interesting to see how it's changed.
But it's interesting that auction houses have survived, like Sotheby's or Christie's, the big players. Mm-hmm. They've survived 300 years.
Yes.
And I don't see any reason why they should not be there in 100 years and 200 years. There's a real need for that. So, of course, they have to go with technology and with the time. And that changes the way how they do their job. And it's probably not been always that way.
It's a good segue to my next question, because traditionally auction houses, in particular, we're talking about that handle horological goods, have been the center of horological scholarship. Dealers, collectors, museums, all come together and they're studying, and it's kind of where the market evolves. Yeah. But things have changed recently. So I want your opinion of the state of horological research and where you see it's going today.
You know, when I read the catalogs, I can see very often that these are not written by specialists. And I think that's a problem. Because a lot of people buy by reading and believing what they read, and that has to change. So I think we need, in this auction world, more specialists explaining their pieces. It's not the same everywhere, but I think in general, the quality is not where it used to be.
I think it's fun to look back at old auction catalogs from even 20, 30 years ago. And you could, even going back, let's go back 40, 50 years, it was just a description.
Yes.
And you would have to go to the auction house and meet the specialist. Then we started seeing in the late 90s these elaborate descriptions and essays, in particular in the early 2000s. But now, I mean, there's more bells and whistles than ever before in terms of photography and storytelling. And but the scholarship sometimes is lacking.
Well, you brought it up in one of your podcasts, the paste and copy culture in the people who write these catalogs. Yes. And then all of a sudden, the Calatrava is invented by...
That's true. David Penny.
David Penny,
yes.
Our good old friend.
Yes.
He's not a watchmaker at all.
And if you haven't read that story, please look on Collectability of how David Penny did not invent the reference 96. And it's comical, but we still see it in auction catalogs today. People regurgitating messages that are untrue. I mean, there are some specialists that we all know and respect, and they do such an amazing job presenting watches. But I think as an overall state of scholarship, it's moved outside of the auction houses in many cases. And some of the best research is not done within the auction houses today. And that's a good thing, because I want to see it done with you at Patek Philippe or other museums that are focused on all things horological. It's wonderful, just because we live in a digital world, how people are researching and all over the world. It's a global situation today.
You know, as much as we criticize this, on the other end, it offers new opportunities, because if you really know, then you can discover things nobody's seen.
That's true. The dislocation of information, sometimes we see with smaller auction houses in particular. You think you could find the rarest, most amazing piece. It's always tough, though, in the last 30 seconds when 5 other people have the information you have, and then you see the price go into the hundreds of thousands. But you could still find a good deal sometimes.
I'm sure you can. Yeah.
So it's good.
So this whole world of auctions is based on knowledge, and that's what makes it so interesting. And with knowledge, you can direct to here or to there.
And I think I've been asking this question to a lot of friends and collectors recently of the state of auction scholarship. And it comes down to this. There's a lot of modern watches showing up at auction today. And if you're selling a reference 5711 Nautilus at auction, okay, there's really no academics. It's just about price. It's a commodity. But if you're looking at an incredible 17th century enamel, it's a different story.
Or if I look at a wonderful Patek Philippe pocket watch, 100 years old. Many of these watches are sold for prices the company would not be able to produce these watches for. You pay 5,000, 6,000 for a golden watch with a beautiful movement, with all these little details in there, on a much higher craftsmanship level as we are able to do that today, and for no money. So I think there is a sleeping market, and I heavily advise people to buy pocket watches.
You heard it here from Dr. Peter Fries. No, I couldn't agree more. And that's why pocket watches for me are an obsession, because even under $10,000, you could find something extraordinary. And then if you go up to 100,000, you
get the best of the best.
The best of the best, some of the most important historical watchmakers.
You can buy a watch with 200-300 parts.
Yes.
Having lots of special functions and perpetual calendars, minute repeaters. It's no money. You know, it's a lot of money, but it's no money compared to what you have to pay for very modern watches, don't having these complications.
And here's our challenge today, and this is for the whole horological world. You buy one of these extraordinary, complicated pieces. How do you get it serviced? So I'd love your opinion on the state of watchmaking today, and just preservation and restoration in terms of Patek Philippe.
Yeah, I come out of a generation where you, in your masterpiece, which I did, you still had to build a watch. So you had to demonstrate you're able to do that from the beginning to the last part. I think that has changed a lot. Today, maybe I'm not fair, but I just try to get it kind of explained. It's more in the servicing part. The people do not know anymore really how to make parts. They don't really learn that to the extent that we were thrilled to do it. And the market does not need that, because these parts are now done by robots, by computers, in a quality Thomas Much and Mr. Breguet and Mr. Bergy would have dreamed of to have. So making these parts just by hand would not fulfill the purpose, because they're using also materials today the earlier watchmakers did not even have. Watchmaking today is an art of engineering on a level of quality we have never seen in the world before. And it has very little to do how we did in the 1960s and 1950s and earlier, how we repaired and made watches. So there is a disconnect, and this disconnect finally leads to a problem in restoration, that when you have a very old watch, the young watchmakers are not automatically able to fix those. We do not know at this point of time how that, call it a problem, can be easily fixed.
There seems to be a lot of watch technicians today that the schools are graduating, but not as many watchmakers. And I hope that evolves and changes over time, because there is a growing community of new watchmakers who actually can make parts,
yes,
and solve problems and reverse engineer. There's not many.
When you look at the independent watchmakers, you can see that. There is a quality level, and these are entrepreneurs, and these are autodidacts. They teach themselves. They are in the right circles. They teach each other. So I'm not worried that it will disappear. Not at all. But it's definitely a different marketplace if you repair a very modern watch made today with these modern tools and new materials, silicon, etc. And if you take one of these tourbillons I talked about earlier, 120 years old, in the perfect style of those days.
encourage on many of our podcasts young people, actually at any age, to consider a career in watchmaking for the reasons that we're discussing now. Patek Philippe has a school, but the Patek Philippe School here in New York. Other brands have their own schools, and in many cases, you can get a free education and a very well-paying job. And I think it's a career that I really encourage a lot of people to consider. This is good for our industry. It's good for the museum world, the dealer world, the auction world, and it's just good for the state of horology. So that's my plug for become a watchmaker.
I think you're right on.
Started your career, which is spectacular. So yeah. That's wonderful. This past summer, I saw you, Peter, at the Patek Philippe exhibition in Tokyo, interacting and giving tours to guests from around the world, mostly from Japan. And they were hanging on every word you said. They were absolutely hungry for information about historic Patek Philippe watches. Then I saw the same people, I was there for 4 days, it was fantastic, go to the other areas of the exhibition, see the modern watches and interact with the same enthusiasm. But I was really, my takeaway was I was really amazed of how excited they were to see the museum brought to them in Tokyo. What was your experience in Japan, and what do you think of these massive traveling exhibitions that Patek Philippe has been doing every 2 years?
I think it's a very smart move to have important pieces from the collection in a special dedicated area of that exhibition to show the history, not only in Geneva, but wherever we go, if it's Singapore or New York or Tokyo or London, Munich, that were the kind of the stations we were with this exhibit. And you're right, the people love storytellers, and museum people are storytellers. We use our historical knowledge, we use our knowledge about, in this case, of the watches, and we bring that together. And then we have a context. And all of a sudden, people understand what timekeeping means, what watchmaking means, how this is a fruitful partnership between craftsmen and scientists. So when there's a new discovery of a law of nature, like Christian Huygens and the law of the pendulum, that has instantly impact on the preciseness of timekeepers. And overnight, it changes the industry. When Jean-Adrien Philippe invents his crown-winding setting mechanisms, and he forces the market to concentrate on that, and every technology used before will disappear, not within days, but very quickly. It's a disrupting technology. And we have that today in milliseconds when we use our little devices. And we see it everywhere, that some professions disappear and new ones emerge. That was probably always the time, but it happens today much faster than any day before. Yeah, if you tell these stories and you take the people from where they are, what they see, what they discover today, how technology impacts their life today, then you can go back in history and say, 100 years ago, 50 years ago, it was this invention which changed the world. And then they take the story home, and then they understand.
And this is one of the most enjoyable things. And I'm going to say we, because you do it, I do it, and a lot of our mutual friends do it. They connect individuals to watches that they express maybe just a subtle interest in. And it could be at a museum, it could be at an exhibition, or it could be something someone's considering to buy. And then getting into their shoes, like why are they initially connected to that piece? And then using history or other things from the artillery of our storytelling to connect to that individual piece is one of the most fun things that we do.
Of course, watches bring hundreds, thousands, millions, and this is the talk of the town when it happens. But finally, this watch ends up in the showcase, and it has to be put at the right spot in the context of the other pieces, and it has to survive with its own history, parallel to the history of all the other pieces. And that's what we curators do. So acquiring, again, is fun, it's nice, it puts you into the spotlight, but at the end, it's the watch in the showcase. Why we do this all around about, and why we want to bring with a good story this piece alive and make it unforgettable for our visitors.
In terms of visitors in a post-COVID world, are you seeing a different type, a different demographic of visitors coming to the museum?
It was very interesting. Actually, it's a good. Thank you for the good question. Of course, the museum was closed during COVID for a certain amount of time, mm-hmm. and then international guests were not allowed to come. So because there was no tourism, no airplanes were flying for, I don't know, but by feeling, I would say at least a year. From China, people came after 2 years, so it took even longer for them to travel. So for these, let's say, around about 2 years, the museum became all of a sudden the location for the local people, which we did not have so much before. So all of a sudden, more Genevan people discovered that place. And that was a nice move. People did not know what to do, maybe, so they did not travel. They stayed home and discovered what they had. They could have always visited. Now they were there, and now even more of them are coming. So that was a nice takeaway from the COVID crisis. And international travels has now gone back to an amount which I've never seen before. I did not expect that. So more and more people are coming. It's interesting.
That's great news. The traffic is up and it's global, but I love to hear, because I've never heard that before, but it makes sense. You had a lot of locals during COVID.
Yeah.
Because they probably have walked by the museum.
We have even in those, at that time, of course, when the museum was closed, your annual attendance drops down and you can never make it up. But when the museum was open, it was running from record to record.
That's extraordinary.
And that's amazing.
Let's talk about you for just a moment. I hear you're a bit of a celebrity in Germany, because there's a certain TV show that you're on. Can you share about that experience and what you're up to in Germany?
You know, it was about 40 years ago, a person from the broadcasting station visited me and said, I plan to do something like the road show in England and in America, and he wanted to have my advice how to do that. We had a good conversation, and then I lost track of him. He asked me if I would join the team. I said, I can't. I have too many other things to do right now. And recently, maybe 5 years ago, they called me again and said, we have a need of a watchmaker, explaining to people bringing their clocks and watches to the show what they have, and they also want to know what the value of the pieces is. And I do this now since a couple of years. It's 1-2 times a year, and it's a real joy, because it's a joy on many levels. First of all the other specialists are also museum directors, so you're in a very elite group of people. You can exchange information and knowledge and having fun. And then being in the studio is a lot of fun. You see pieces, sometimes you're surprised, you would like to have one of those, and you can discover pieces that way you normally don't do.
Have you ever seen a Patek Philippe on the show?
Very recently, actually, about a few weeks ago, I had a very nice pocket watch with a perpetual calendar, and so I've gave the owner a lot of information, which he was very happy. And a couple of days ago, he called me and said, would you consider to buy the watch for the museum? I said, thank you, but no, because I have one which a few numbers earlier. So that was the only reason we said no. But it's nice to get in touch with people that way too.
As we wrap up this incredible conversation, everyone always wants to know the answer to this, is what are you wearing? And I noticed you have a 5196G, a white gold Calatrava on your wrist. A personal favorite, but why do you have one? Why is it your watch?
I'm coming back to the first statement I made here. It's a hand winding watch. And when I have clients in the museum and distributors from all over the world sitting in the auditorium, I start always with this game that we all take off our watches, we close our eyes, and we wind them. And I say, this is like drinking a nice bottle of wine. And I have to add that Jean-André Philippe invented a special type of wheel with a special type of teeth, which makes that winding process so smooth without having any grease or oil in that part. No other brand has ever managed that. So winding a Patek Philippe is a joy. It goes so smooth, and that's why I have this watch.
And for our listeners that are watching this on YouTube, I have to see the watch.
You want to see it?
Yes, please.
Here it is.
The 5196 is such a classic. I was just surprised that this is your go-to watch. I absolutely understand. I have one in my collection, yellow gold, and the white gold one is so understated. Well,
it's very simple, but it's so beautiful.
Thanks for sharing that with us today. I'm going to give the watch back now.
Okay.
All right. I have to ask this because this is the second go-to question that I must ask. Outside of watches, outside of the world of horology, what do you do for fun?
There's lots of things, but one thing I really enjoy is I go with my little boy, 11 years old. We have a common hobby, which is collecting trains. So we have a huge collection of locomotives and trains, and Miles and I, we go every week to a place with a big train set, really big, and we can drive locomotives with many carriages, and sometimes these trains are 2 meters or 3 meters long, and we have a blast of the day.
Oh, that's great. Do you think your son will be interested in watches, or is he already?
Well, you know, sometimes he comes to the museum and says, "Daddy, your tour is boring, I take over." And then he comes up with invented stories, and all of a sudden he has 10 people around him and they're listening to him. And then
I want to take the tour with him.
Yeah, you
That'd
should.
Be great.
You should.
That's wonderful. And last but not least, we have these amazing new books, the Patek Philippe Museum collection. This is a book that just came out last year. Can you tell us about it?
Yeah, we're doing big catalogs where every watch of the museum is described in all its details and photographed from front and back and side movements, etc. So these volumes are heavy, 10 kilograms and more, and there's thousands of pages. That's nothing for everybody when he just visited the museum and wants to have a memory. So we created these 2 volumes here, one on the antique collection, one on the Patek Philippe collection, each 100 pages, and having design which is, I think, exceptional, having photographs of the highest quality nowadays available. And these, when Mr. Philip Stern, who decided the pieces we showed there, we're not saying these are the best of the best. These are 100 pieces which kind of tell the story of the museum and the collection. And the other ones are equally good. So every watch we have in the museum could have been in the catalog, but we had to make this final decision. So there's about 240 watches displayed here out of almost 3,000.
Just thumbing through these pages, it must have been extraordinarily difficult to choose which watches made the cut to be in this book.
Yeah, but, you know, Mr. Philip Stern, he knows his pieces, and for him it was not very difficult to make a decision on that level. We had some discussions on this and that, and sometimes it had to fit to the story, so there were little corrections. And, of course, over the process, you do a book like this, you have new acquisitions, and then you think, oh, this has to be in there. Sometimes we did, sometimes we did not. All the other ones which are not in these 2 books will now be published on the whole catalog, but that's in total 3,000 pages.
Wow. This is available, I understand, at Amazon.com here in the United States and at a bookstore near you. And do you know the retail price off the top of your head?
I don't know how much it is in the US, but in Switzerland and in Europe, it's either 50 euros or 50 Swiss francs, and I think it's pretty much an amount which you have to pay here as well. So for us, it's important to make this book accessible for everybody, and to have a nice memory of the visit, so the price is according to that goal.
And finally, a Patek Philippe book that doesn't cost thousands of dollars.
Exactly.
Exactly. Peter, thank you so much for your time today. I had so much fun speaking with you. And are there any parting thoughts you'd like to share with our listeners?
I didn't know that we can talk so long and so much about the museum, so I'm surprised myself. So it was a real joy. Thank you very much.
I hope we could have you back someday soon. Thank you, Peter, so much for your time. And thank you, our listeners, for joining us today. I encourage all of you to go to the Patek Philippe Museum in Geneva. If you've already been there, it's time to go back. There's just so much to see, so much to learn. And I encourage you to use the iPad to have a presentation that you might not have had in the past before the new iPad program was developed by Peter and his team at the museum. And if it's your first time at the Patek Philippe Museum, you're in for a treat. And I hope this little teaser gave you a taste of what the Patek Philippe Museum is all about and how it truly is life-changing to visit this amazing place in Geneva, Switzerland. So if you enjoyed this episode, please like and subscribe. And I want to thank you so much for your time today. And until next time, enjoy the hunt.